Nonviolence section. Armed struggle as lesser evil. More measured, perhaps, was Henry David Thoreau, who, distinguishing himself from the bulk of the pacifist movement, assumed secular accents and was inclined to a pagan cult of nature. At the time of Mexico's invasion by the United States, Thoreau had likewise called for resistance to war and slavery. One could not remain passive, quote, when the sixth of the population of a nation which has undertaken to be the refuge of liberty are slaves, and a whole country is unjustly overrun and conquered by a foreign army and subjected to military law. I think that it is not too soon for honest men to rebel and revolutionize. End quote. The revolution thus invoked was not armed rebellion, but civil disobedience, the new technique of struggle that gave its title to the book cited here. Nevertheless, Thoreau's tone was radical enough. Quote, this people must cease to hold slaves and to make war on Mexico, though it cost them their existence as a people. End quote. This involved carrying out a peaceable revolution as and when possible. But what if the bitterness of the struggle led to blood being spilt? Would the remedy not have proven worse than the ill? The answer was not long in the coming. Quote, it is the fault of the government that the remedy is worse than the evil. It makes it worse. End quote. In short, the most serious violence was that which had already been perpetrated for centuries with the enslavement of the blacks, and which was further exacerbated following the war aimed at wresting territory from Mexico and reintroducing slavery there. Starting from such radical opposition to slaveholding power, Thoreau had no difficulty in making the transition from civil disobedience, construed as peaceable revolution, to resolute moral and political support for Brown, the armed prophet of the desired rebellion by the Southern slaves. In these years, the person who assumed the most lucid and sober attitude was perhaps Angelina Grimke. Taking a stand on the law on fugitive slaves and the acute conflicts provoked by it, this militant with a Quaker tradition behind her frankly and soberly theorized the inevitability in such circumstances of violation of the general principle of nonviolence. As explained in a letter sent to Garrison, a tragic situation had been created with the manifestation of an acute contradiction between two equally absolute and irrevocable values, between which a choice nevertheless had to be made. Beginning of long quote. Although the shedding of human blood is utterly abhorrent to my mind, yet the tame surrender of a helpless victim up to the fate of the slave is far more abhorrent. In this case, it seems as though we are compelled to choose between two evils, and all that we can do is take the least, and baptize liberty in blood, if it must be so. I now entirely despair of the triumph of justice and humanity without the shedding of blood. A temporary war is an incomparably less evil than a permanent slavery. End of long quote. There were still some years to go before the outbreak of the Civil War, but it had, in a sense, already been evoked. Conscious theorization of the inevitability of resorting to violence allowed Grimke to avoid the criminalization or dehumanization of the enemy, the result arrived at by followers of nonviolence engaged in preserving their formal consistency, and impelled by this to assimilate their enemies to common criminals, wild beasts, or instruments of Satan. What jumps out at us, however, is the paradox whereby Grimke regards as incomparably less evil an armed conflict that ended up causing more U.S. casualties than the two world wars put together. End of section.